A police officer was patrolling the snowy woods alone when he spotted something strange. 4 dark shapes curled up under an old pine. He stepped closer. What he found was a starving German Shepherd mother shielding her 3 puppies with her body, eyes frozen wide with silence and pain. What happened next unraveled a mystery and a secret buried beneath snow and scars. This story will break your heart and rebuild it again with hope. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. And if you believe that no animal should suffer in silence, hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to hear just might change how you see second chances. Coldwater Hollow, Montana, where winter wasn't a season, but a siege. In January, the sky forgot what color wasn't gray. Snow draped everything in white silence, from the crumbling wood fences lining back roads to the spindly pine trees twisted by decades of wind. By late afternoon, the storm had grown teeth-sharp gusts howled like lost voices across the valley, snowflakes swirling thick as ash. Sheriff Eli Warren guided his patrol truck through the narrow forest path that split from Highway 6. The tires crunched over fresh snow, and his headlights pierced the growing dusk. He didn't usually respond to vague, anonymous calls, especially not ones like the one he got earlier. "There's something crying near the old silo, East Ridge. You should come alone." No name, no callback number, just static and then the click of a receiver being slammed down. Eli had been sheriff of Coldwater Hollow for 7 years. At 42, he still had the frame of the athlete he once was. Broad shoulders, straight back, but his face showed wear. Laugh lines were now creases of quiet concern, and his green eyes had dulled since the accident. The death of his wife Mary Ann, in a snowstorm not unlike this one, 2 years ago, had left him quieter, less prone to trust the world, less likely to ignore a whisper in the dark. Tonight, something in that anonymous voice gnawed at him. It didn't sound like a prank. It sounded personal, desperate. The old silo sat in a clearing half a mile from the main road. It hadn't been used in over a decade, ever since the Mason family sold their property to a development company that never built anything. Now, it just stood a rusting cylinder surrounded by frozen weeds and sagging fencing, almost buried under the weight of forgotten years and heavy snowfall. Eli parked his truck behind a slope of wind-packed snow and grabbed his flashlight. His boots sank a few inches with every step. The wind cut sideways across his face like a blade. As he approached the silo, the landscape grew impossibly still. Not the gentle quiet of nature, but the unnatural silence that presses down when something's about to break. Then he heard it, barely audible over the wind, a muffled whimper, faint, fragile, like a sob caught in fur. He swept his flashlight across the base of the silo. Nothing. Then, movement. Just off the tree line, beneath the drooping branches of a snow-heavy pine, something shifted. Eli approached cautiously, one hand on the handle of his sidearm. As the beam of his flashlight fell upon the source, he froze. It was a dog. No, a German Shepherd. Her coat, once golden black, was now dulled by grime and ice, patches of it matted or missing. Her ribs pressed against her thin frame, and her eyes wide, amber and exhausted, met his without flinching. She didn't bark, didn't growl, didn't run. She simply lay there, curled tightly around 3 small shapes pressed to her side. 3 puppies. Eli dropped to a knee in the snow, the flashlight trembling in his hand. The pups were barely weeks old. One was a pale cream, another a darker brown, the third a mix in between. They twitched and shivered against their mother's flank, too weak to even cry properly. One of them moved a paw feebly, stirring the powdery snow. "Jesus," Eli murmured. He felt the old ache behind his ribs again, that dull throb that came with loss, with helplessness. The same ache he felt when he found Marianne's empty car turned upside down in a ravine years ago. The shepherd didn't take her eyes off him. Her body was coiled in instinct, but she didn't move. She was waiting, watching. "Where did you come from?" he asked softly. Then he noticed something barely visible in the whiteout. Paw prints in the snow, not just dog prints, human boots, heavy, leading toward the silo and then vanishing. Someone had brought her here, or worse, left her. He looked around again. Nothing but snow and silence. The sensible part of his brain started whispering, "Don't bring them into your house. They could be sick, dangerous, fleas, rabies, distemper. You're not a vet, you're a cop. Call animal control." But that voice was drowned out by something older, more human. This wasn't just a stray dog. This was a mother, starving, freezing, doing everything she could to protect her children, and no one was coming for her. Without another word, Eli shrugged off his jacket, wrapped it around the mother dog gently, and scooped up the smallest pup into his other arm. She still didn't move, just lowered her head, letting him. It took 2 trips back and forth through the snow to carry them all to the truck. He cranked the heat and sat for a long moment, watching the shepherd and her puppies huddle on the passenger seat floor beneath the blast of warm air. Eli reached for the radio mic to report the incident, then paused. Something about this felt watched. He flicked off the radio and started the engine. The road back to town felt longer than it should. Behind them, the forest swallowed the silo once more. The snow had started falling harder. The silence in the truck was warm this time. Not empty, just waiting. The snow was still falling when Eli pulled up to his cabin on the edge of Coldwater Hollow's eastern forest line. The log house sat half-sunken into the slope, chimney puffing smoke into the cold gray sky. Warm light spilled faintly from a single window. It was the kind of home built for solitude, sturdy, silent, and surrounded by nothing but trees and wind. He parked beneath the overhang, cut the engine, and sat for a moment. The heat inside the truck was already beginning to fade. The German shepherd, her ribs still trembling beneath his jacket, lay curled with her pups on the floorboard. Eli looked down at her, and again their eyes met. There was no aggression, no fear, just that same quiet vigilance. A watchfulness born of being hurt too many times and knowing the next blow could come from anywhere. He opened the door slowly, letting in a gust of frozen air. The dog stiffened, but didn't move. Eli bent down and scooped up the smallest pup first, the pale one, and cradled it in his gloved hands. It barely stirred. "Let's get you warm," he murmured. It took him several careful trips to carry the mother and all 3 pups inside. He laid them on an old wool blanket near the fireplace, then stoked the coals until a proper fire roared to life, casting flickering orange light across the log walls. The room was modest but clean. A brown corduroy couch, a pine coffee table marked with scratches and old mug rings, a stack of dog-eared mystery novels on the side table, and a few framed photos still standing. His wedding photo with Mary Ann, and a shot of the 2 of them hiking in Glacier Park with his old bloodhound Rufus, who had passed the year before she did. Eli knelt beside the German shepherd, his breath still fogging in the chill that clung to the floor despite the fire. "I don't know who left you out there," he whispered, "but it won't happen again." Her breathing had slowed, but her eyes never closed. She watched him like a soldier waits for orders, not trusting, not afraid, just prepared. It was then, as he reached out to gently pull back the blanket, that he noticed them. Thin, straight lines carved into the skin beneath her patchy fur. Some were old and pale, like white strings laced into her coat. Others were red and raw, just beginning to scab. He inhaled slowly. "Those aren't from the wild." He ran a hand down her side, stopping just above the hip where a jagged scar curved like a question mark. Further up, around her neck, the fur was rubbed bare, revealing bruised skin, the unmistakable mark of a collar yanked too tight for too long. Eli didn't need to be a vet to recognize this for what it was. Abuse. Deliberate, systematic abuse. Still, she didn't flinch. She just watched. "I'm going to clean those cuts, all right?" he said softly, rising and moving to the kitchen. From a cabinet above the sink, he retrieved a small metal first aid box. He'd stocked it well over the years, more out of habit than need peroxide, gauze, antibiotic ointment. When he returned, the shepherd was in the same place, her puppies pressed close against her side. He crouched down again, this time moving more slowly, showing her the bottle, the cloth. "Just gonna clean you up, no tricks." She didn't resist as he dabbed gently at the worst of the cuts. She didn't growl or whimper. She just breathed in silence and kept her amber eyes locked on his. That silence, he realized, was its own kind of pain. Somewhere in the middle of it, a name came to him. It wasn't planned. It wasn't dramatic. It just rose up like a memory. "Nova," he said aloud. The name seemed to belong to her somehow, not because it was soft or pretty, but because it meant something broken that still burned. He leaned back on his heels. "You look like a Nova." Still, no sound, no movement. He turned his attention to the pups. The pale one was the weakest, its breathing shallow, its limbs thin and twitchy. The brown one, slightly larger, nudged at its sibling with its nose. The third, darker golden with a white-tipped tail, was nestled firmly beneath its mother's leg. He touched them gently, checking for visible wounds, but aside from cold and hunger, they seemed uninjured. Too young for this world. Barely 3 weeks old, if he had to guess. Nova shifted slightly, just enough to tuck the blanket more tightly around them with her snout. "You're a good mother," he said. "I don't know how long you were out there, but you held it together." He stood and moved to the kitchen, started heating water for oatmeal on the stove. Not just for himself, he'd mash some of it up with warm milk for the pups if they'd eat. As he stirred the pot, a soft knock tapped against the door. Eli paused. It was late. Too late for company. No one just dropped by in Coldwater Hollow, not when the snow fell like this. He crossed to the door, boots echoing softly across the wooden floor, and opened it a crack. Nothing. Just snow, wind, trees. He stepped out onto the porch, peering into the forest beyond the clearing. The light above the door flickered as the wind howled, but there was no movement. Then he saw it. In the snow, right at the bottom of the porch steps, another set of prints. Heavy boots, fresh, leading away into the trees. Someone had come close. Close enough to see the cabin, close enough to knock, but not close enough to be seen. He stared at the tracks for a long time before retreating back inside and locking the door behind him. Back in the living room, Nova was finally resting, her eyes closed for the first time. But Eli didn't feel at ease. Something about this wasn't random. Someone had brought her here, left her, or worse, placed her. He sat near the fire, watching the flames dance behind the grate. Nova breathed deeply beside him, the pups twitching now and then in their sleep. Outside, the wind picked up again, whistling through the trees like a warning. The snowstorm had settled into a steady rhythm by morning, blanketing the forest around Eli's cabin in a muffled stillness. From the front porch, he watched the pines sway under the weight of white, the trees like old sentinels hiding secrets beneath their limbs. Inside, the fire crackled softly, and Nova was curled beside it, her 3 puppies nestled into the curve of her body. She had eaten a little during the night lukewarm oatmeal and mashed soft kibble, and her eyes had softened, though she still hadn't made a sound. Eli hadn't slept much. The fresh boot prints outside had etched themselves into his thoughts. Someone had been out there. Someone who wanted to be seen. Just enough. His gut said it wasn't random, and that meant this dog, these puppies, weren't either. With a fresh mug of coffee in hand, Eli opened his laptop at the kitchen table. The sheriff's department had access to regional databases, and though his connection was slow out in the woods, it would do. He pulled up the state's missing canine animal reports. Then he searched German Shepherd and filtered by year. There were dozens of results, but one stood out immediately. Case number 29177, canine. Handler, report withdrawn. Animal status unresolved. He clicked it open. The report was dated 6 months ago. The dog in the profile photo had golden black fur, bright eyes, a strong frame, and a scar under her left ear. The same scar Eli had noticed on Nova, but the report had been closed. Not resolved, just closed. The stated reason: insufficient evidence of theft. Possible runaway, no further action. The dog's designation was printed in bold just beneath the image, K9S4DEL13. Eli exhaled sharply. Nova. He scrolled further. The original handler name was redacted, but the supervising officer listed for the training facility was Richard Danner. The name landed like a stone in Eli's chest. Rick Danner had once been a patrol officer in Coldwater Hollow years ago. A barrel-chested man with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow and a loud, bitter laugh. He had a temper that brewed just beneath his skin and boiled over too often. Eli had worked with him briefly, but Danner had been dismissed after a misconduct investigation use of excessive force during a canine training session. The details had been hazy, but Eli remembered a broken dog's leg, conflicting reports, and a hurried resignation before the case ever reached court. Danner had disappeared after that. Rumor said he'd relocated south, maybe Idaho or Wyoming, but no one knew for sure. Now his name was here, tied to Nova's file. Eli leaned back, staring at the screen. This wasn't just a lost dog. Nova had been trained, tagged, registered, and abandoned. Or worse. He clicked through attached documents and found a scanned incident report from the Training Center Mountain Edge Tactical Canine Unit, Fort Bell, MT. The report stated that the dog in question had failed aggression test protocols and was deemed unsuitable for service. It included a recommendation for retirement or humane euthanasia. But Nova had survived. Someone hadn't followed the protocol. He kept digging, now searching records for the Mountain Edge facility. It was a private security training outfit, formerly tied to state law enforcement but now contracted out to private entities. Most of the dogs there were bred for patrol or protection work, trained with high-intensity tactics. Eli had heard of them. He'd even seen some of their dogs in action once during a statewide operation involving riot control. He found a PDF listing the canines that had failed the training in the past year. 9 dogs in total. Nova's ID was among them. Attached were images grainy photos taken during exercises. One photo showed Nova mid-lunge toward a padded target. Another, far more haunting, showed her chained to a short lead in a concrete training pen, ribs showing, eyes wild. Another showed a different German Shepherd collapse during a simulation, handler standing over it with a baton. Eli's stomach turned. He closed the laptop and stood abruptly, pacing to the fireplace. Nova watched him, ears pricking slightly. Her body had begun to relax over the past few hours, but she still didn't let her eyes stray far from him. "I'm sorry," he muttered. "Whatever they put you through, it ends now." He needed more than a database. He needed someone who'd worked inside the system, someone who might remember what happened behind those doors, and there was one person who might still have a foot in that world. Dr. Lenora Hayes, a veterinary consultant who had overseen animal wellness at Mountain Edge before resigning last year. Eli remembered her from a seminar on canine trauma recovery. Mid-50s, sharp as glass, short gray curls and a calm demeanor that made even the angriest German Shepherds fall still. She'd left the program suddenly, citing philosophical differences. He searched her name, found a clinic address in Missoula. Not too far. He sent a short email. "Dr. Hayes, this is Sheriff Eli Warren, Coldwater Hollow PD. I'm in possession of a former canine with ID K9S4DEL13. She's alive but injured. I'd like to speak about her training history. It's urgent." He hit send. Outside, the storm had let up a little, just flurries now, dancing through the air like ash from some far-off fire. The tracks near his porch were half covered, fading, like someone had never been there at all, but they had, and they knew where he lived. The drive to Rick Danner's old property took nearly an hour, following a winding road that hugged the edge of Coldwater Hollow's frozen lake and cut through stretches of pine so dense they blocked even the pale midday light. The clouds hung low again, bruised and heavy with snow that hadn't started falling, but promised it would soon. Eli drove with both hands on the wheel, jaw tight, a dull ache behind his eyes. He hadn't heard back from Dr. Hayes yet, but something about that sealed file wouldn't let go. He needed to see where Danner had lived, needed something physical to ground all the ugliness beginning to rise. Danner's place had been foreclosed and sold to a salvage company 3 years ago, but the structure still stood, a single-story garage and outbuilding near the tree line, boarded up with warped plywood and faded warning signs. The sheriff's office had cleared the property of anything deemed active danger, but no one had done anything with the land since. Eli stepped out of his truck and pulled his collar high against the wind. The cold bit harder here, more cutting, like it remembered things the air in town didn't. The garage door was padlocked but not alarmed. Eli retrieved a pry bar from his trunk and broke the latch clean. The hinges groaned like an old man stretching too far as the door rolled up. The inside smelled like mold and oil. Dust hung in thick motes, disturbed by the sudden rush of air. The space was cluttered with old crates, broken tools, rusted chain-link fencing. But near the back, behind a collapsed shelving unit, was what he was looking for: trapdoor hinges set into the concrete, poorly concealed with a piece of plywood and an overturned tire. He knelt and brushed off the dirt. There was a handle recessed into the wood, faint scarring around the edges where someone had pried it open many times. The hatch groaned but opened without force. Cold air breathed up from the darkness below. He clicked on his flashlight and descended slowly. The basement was unfinished. Damp stone walls, a low ceiling with exposed beams. A single bulb hung from a frayed wire. Dead. His flashlight beam swept across a cement floor etched with old stains and claw marks. Iron rings had been bolted into the wall, 6 of them in total each, with lengths of chain still attached. Along the back wall was a crude wooden table, and beside it, a metal kennel, its bars bent inward as if something had once slammed against it with desperate force. He moved to the table. A pile of notebooks, dog tags, and laminated cards were stacked haphazardly. He picked one up. It was a training manual official, state-issued, but scribbled over in red ink. The margins were filled with handwritten notes, some legible, some scratched like a mind unraveling. Words like condition harder, reject weakness, eye contact equal submission. Then came the photos. They were tucked into one of the notebooks, paper-clipped together, dozens of them. Dogs mid-lunge, dogs tied down, dogs shocked, dogs foaming at the mouth. And in one of them his stomach turned. It was Nova. Younger, her coat cleaner, but her eyes, they were the same. Wide, alert, full of terror. She was strapped to a restraint board, legs spread and tied, a muzzle clamped tight. Her pupils were enormous, her gaze fixed on something just beyond the frame. He dropped the photo. His hand shook slightly. Then he saw the final notebook. Smaller, bound in leather. No label on the front. Inside were rows of names handwritten, each a dog's name or designation, with a note beside it. Passed, too soft, untrainable, sold, X. K9, S4, DEL 13, X. But the pen didn't strike through the name. It circled it, then underlined it twice. Beside it, in small block letters, refused. Eli flipped further. Near the back was something unexpected, a piece of lined paper glued hastily to a page. It was a child's drawing crude, done in colored pencil. It showed a German shepherd with a blue collar standing next to a stick figure holding a leash. The child had written above it in shaky letters, "My friend Sunny. She listens better than people." In the bottom corner, a name was signed in loopy handwriting. Jonah. Eli's breath caught. He didn't know Danner had a child. There'd never been mention of a son or family, but here was evidence poignant and out of place in a world of cold cement and cruelty. Why was the drawing here, in the middle of this madness? Was Jonah his son? A student? Someone else entirely? Eli stood, gathering the notebooks into a folder. He took the photo of Nova, the child's drawing, and the list of crossed-out dogs. Before climbing the stairs, he paused and looked around one last time. The basement was dead silent, but he felt watched like. Something had stayed behind in these walls, echoing the screams that once filled them. Back at the truck, the sky had darkened further, promising more snow. He drove back toward town in silence, Nova's photo resting on the passenger seat beside him, her frozen eyes staring up at the ceiling. The wind had picked up again by the time Eli reached the eastern ridge of Coldwater Hollow, where the pine forest gave way to old ranch land that hadn't been lived in for years. The call had come in just before noon. A local hunter had spotted smoke rising through the trees beyond Harlan Creek. By the time emergency services arrived, the fire had already burned itself out. What remained was a smoking ruin, blackened earth surrounded by a scorched ring of snow and silence. Eli parked his cruiser at the edge of the trail. The cold was sharper here, as if the fire had sucked all the heat from the ground and left only steam and memory behind. He slipped on gloves and moved past the burned timber, stepping over twisted remnants of fencing and half-melted tools. The property had once been a horse ranch, according to old tax records, vacant for years. No registered owner since 2019. The air smelled of charred wood and something sharper chemical, synthetic. Eli crouched near a pile of smoldering debris and poked it with the end of a stick. A burned-out cage emerged from beneath the ash, the kind used for medium-sized animals. The latch was scorched but still intact. He stood and scanned the area. His boots crunched across what had once been a gravel path. Near the remnants of a side shed, he found something buried under a half-collapsed beam, a trap door, blackened by soot but still intact. He crouched and ran his fingers along the metal edge. The hinges had been warped by heat, but not destroyed. He forced it open. A rush of colder air escaped from below, laced with the acrid tang of ammonia and burnt plastic. A set of wooden stairs descended into a concrete chamber. Eli stepped down carefully, his flashlight sweeping across the walls. What he found made his chest tighten. It was a bunker 10 feet by 15 lined with crates, metal tables, and storage racks. The walls were covered in insulation panels, some scorched, some intact. On the floor, near the far corner, was a shallow metal basin. Its contents had boiled off, but a crust of pinkish residue remained likely tranquilizer, he guessed. Scattered nearby were leather straps, lengths of frayed rope, and a muzzle, half melted but still recognizable. He bent closer to inspect a cracked wooden board leaning against the far wall. Someone had carved something into it, rough but precise, letters and numbers. He traced his gloved finger across the burned wood, K9S4DEL13. Nova. His heart kicked in his chest. The same code as in the training records, the photo, the sealed report. And now, here, buried under ash, almost erased. There was blood, too, not a lot, but enough. Dark stains on the floor, spattered across the leg of a metal cot. Too old to be from the fire. He swabbed a sample and sealed it in a forensic tube from his coat pocket. He knew someone at the state lab who still owed him a favor. As he turned to leave, his flashlight caught the shattered remains of a camera mounted in the corner lens cracked, wires yanked from the wall. Someone had tried to erase what had happened here, but not well enough. Back at the surface, the wind was stronger now. The trees leaned like eavesdropping giants. He heard a low growl before he saw her. Nova stood just beyond the tree line, tail low, ears pinned, body rigid. Her hackles were raised, eyes fixed on the smoldering ruin. She'd slipped her way out of the truck bed, likely following his scent. Eli stepped carefully toward her. "Nova," he called gently. "It's okay." But it wasn't. Not for her. She crept forward, pause slow, deliberate. When she reached the edge of the burnt structure, she stopped, nose twitching. The air had shifted. Eli felt it too. The smell of ash, of trauma, of something buried and left to rot. Then she howled, a long, broken sound that echoed off the trees like a cry too long held in. Her body trembled, but she didn't run. She sat instead, head still tilted, eyes staring at the hatch he'd opened. Her nose lifted again, testing the smoke, the chemicals, the ghosts. Eli crouched beside her and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. She flinched, just once, then stilled beneath his touch. "You've been here before," he whispered. She didn't move, just breathed. Back at the truck, he loaded her into the back seat instead of the open bed. The pups were safe at the vet clinic for the afternoon. He hadn't wanted them near another fire. Nova curled into herself on the seat, silent again, but not asleep. At the station, Eli filed a preliminary incident report. Unidentified fire, potential arson, animal evidence recovered, possible link to prior sealed canine case. But he didn't mark the case closed. Not even close. The snow had deepened, falling silent and steady like ash from a world already burned. Eli's breath fogged in the frigid air as he crouched behind a knotted root, eyes scanning the tunnel mouth just a few yards ahead. Nova had led him here, her prints in the snow unbroken, her body moving with a purpose born of memory, not instinct. He had followed without question, down the eastern ridge, past old logging markers into the gullet of the mountain. The entrance had been hidden beneath brush and stone, a slit in the earth no wider than a crawlspace. He'd squeezed through, flashlight gripped between his teeth, sidearm drawn. Nova moved ahead without hesitation, her black and gold frame weaving through the shadows like a whisper that remembered being a scream. The tunnel descended into damp silence framed with beams and sagging walls scratched with claw marks. They reached a chamber, man-made. Cement walls, rusted cages, chains curled like sleeping snakes. A table stood crooked near the back, cluttered with vials, straps, and scraps of old uniforms. It smelled like ammonia and metal. Eli's stomach turned. Nova growled low. That was when the ambush came. Two men stepped from the shadows at once, tall and wiry with a broken nose, the other stocky in camo and tactical patches. No warning, no words, just movement. The wiry one lunged. Eli ducked, grabbed his coat, and slammed him into the wall. The flashlight dropped and skittered into the dark. The taller man fought back with a knife-its blade slicing a line across Eli's shoulder. Pain flared hot, but Eli didn't stop. He twisted the attacker's wrist until the blade clanged to the floor. A second gun clicked behind him. Then came the growl. Nova shot from the dark like a thunderclap. She struck the stockier man full force, her jaws clamping around his arm. His pistol fell, echoing. Eli didn't pause. He landed a heavy punch to his opponent's ribs. The man grunted, staggered, but didn't fall. He reached for his ankle a second weapon. Eli dove to the side just as a shot cracked. Dust rained from the ceiling. Nova lunged again, slamming the shooter into the kennel bars. They bent with a metallic screech. The second man dropped, breath wheezing. Eli crawled for the beacon in his jacket pocket and flipped the cover. He pressed it once, twice, a third time. The red light blinked steadily. Then silence returned. The two attackers lay on the floor, one unconscious, the other groaning. Nova stood guard, her body taut, her breath sharp and rhythmic. Eli leaned against the wall, blood seeping from his shoulder into his jacket, breath ragged. But he was alive. So was she. He looked around the room. 3 cages, a restraint board, a wall scratched with names, leashes hung like trophies. On the far table he spotted a tag. He limped over. It read simply, Sonny. Beneath it, carved into the wood in desperate hand, "The ones who listened, we remember." Eli crouched beside Nova. "We'll get them. Every one of them." Nova pressed her body slightly into his, a gesture, a bond. Outside, wind moaned low, but in this space there was only stillness. He glanced to the beacon, still blinking. He didn't know when or if help would come, but now the truth had a place to start. The cold in the tunnel had begun to bite deeper, not just in the air, but in the silence. Eli crouched low, shoulder pressed to the damp wall, one hand still gripping the sidearm he'd stripped from the attacker, the other resting gently on Nova's flank. Her breath came fast, controlled, but her body trembled, not in fear, but in coiled vigilance. Both their gazes were fixed on the tunnel entrance, ears straining for sound. Then it came, the hum of engines. The snow outside began to glow faintly, headlights cutting like blades through the black trees. Then the sirens, first low and distant, then swelling into the night, piercing the mountain's hush. "Hold on, girl," Eli whispered. "They're coming." A blast of white light flooded the tunnel entrance as the lead tactical unit breached the outer threshold. "Coldwater County Sheriff, hands where I can see them." Shadows danced on stone as the 4 officers in winter tactical gear advanced with precision. At their center was Deputy Sarah Klein, face half covered with a balaclava, but her dark, sharp eyes unmistakable. She was lean and tall, with long legs built for movement, and moved like a blade unsheathed, purposeful, steady. Her military background made her the most reliable partner Eli ever had. People called her aloof, but Eli knew better. Sarah had simply learned that some emotions had to wait until the mission ended. "Sheriff," she called, rifle trained ahead. "Over here." Eli stood slowly, one hand up. 2 suspects, down, 1 bleeding, 1 unconscious. Officers rushed forward. Nova stepped aside only when Eli gave a soft nudge. Behind Klein came 2 more figures in black coats marked with bold yellow lettering, FBI. The man in front was Special Agent Marcus Brandt, early 50s with thinning brown hair, round glasses, and a square jaw. He had the no-nonsense demeanor of someone used to breaking bad news and not flinching. He nodded curtly to Eli. "You did good, Sheriff. We've been circling this case for over a year. You cracked it wide open." Eli exhaled. "Names Danner come up yet?" Brandt's eyes narrowed. "Came up enough for us to start digging with real warrants this time." The 2 injured suspects were loaded onto stretchers. Medics checked Eli's shoulder, but he waved them off. "What about her?" Brandt gestured to Nova. Eli knelt beside her again, eyes softening. "She's not evidence. She's the one who saved us." Nova looked up at him, and for the first time since the night she appeared in the snow, her tail gave a slow, uncertain wag. Klein's voice came from behind. "Someone's waiting to see her." Eli turned. Just beyond the cave entrance, standing next to the rear medic truck, was Dr. Rachel Emery, the town's only veterinary trauma specialist. Rachel was in her late 30s, auburn hair tied back in a messy bun, her small frame wrapped in 3 layers of fleece and nylon. She was pale from the cold, but her hazel eyes were warm and alert behind fogged glasses. Rachel had always been practical matter-of-fact, a bit sharp-tongued, never one to tolerate indecision. She had grown up in Missoula, the daughter of 2 ER nurses, and moved to Coldwater Hollow 5 years ago after a breakdown during residency forced her to start over somewhere quiet. She found solace in animals, their pain more honest than people's. Now, she moved quickly to Eli's side, her bag already open. "Let me see her." "She's not bleeding, but she's tense," Eli said, stepping aside. Rachel crouched, hands gentle as they brushed along Nova's shoulders and legs. She spoke softly, not baby talk, but clinical compassion. Nova stayed still, eyes flicking between her and Eli. "She's been through trauma," Rachel murmured. "But she's not broken. She's holding herself together, probably for the pups. How are they?" "At the clinic. Warm, fed. They were dehydrated, but they're responsive now." Nova seemed to understand. Her ears perked at the word pups. Rachel looked up. "She needs rest and care. You both do." Behind them, one of the canine officers stepped forward. He was young, mid-20s with freckles and soft brown eyes. In his hand, he held the lead of a German shepherd in full tactical gear black and tan, large but composed. "This is Raven," the handler said. "She's one of ours." Nova saw the dog and froze. Raven stood calmly, eyes alert but not aggressive. She gave one short wag of her tail and dipped her head slightly. Nova blinked, then took a cautious step forward, and another. Then, gently, as if testing memory, she brushed her nose against Raven's shoulder. Her tail wagged again, stronger this time. Eli stood and looked to Rachel. "That's the first time I've seen her do that." Rachel smiled, wiping something from her eye she didn't want others to notice. "She knows it's over." Snow had fallen steadily for 2 days, blanketing the landscape in layers of pure white that muffled even the sound of breath. The lake, Coldwater by name and by nature, stretched frozen and still in the distance, its surface glassy under the morning sun. The cabin nearby, once a ranger post, then a sheriff's weekend escape, now stood proud with smoke curling from its chimney, windows glowing warmly against the blue-white world. It had been 3 weeks since the cave raid, 3 weeks since Nova had led Eli into the dark and clawed their way back into the light. Now, peace had returned to Coldwater Hollow. Rick Danner, after hours of interrogation and overwhelming evidence, including testimonies from former handlers, DNA traces from multiple dogs, and the haunting photos recovered in the bunker, had been sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. The courtroom had been quiet when the gavel fell. Danner had only stared, expression unreadable, as if still trying to figure out where it all went wrong. Eli hadn't stayed long. Courtrooms never felt like justice to him. Only closure. Back in Coldwater, life began to reshape itself. The cabin had changed. What was once a temporary shelter now buzzed with the gentle, steady rhythm of healing. Inside, the living room had been rearranged with thick rugs, a soft circular dog bed near the hearth, and a corner cleared for medical supplies and blankets. Rachel had helped reorganize everything methodically, with purpose. She had moved in 2 days after the raid, at first just to help with post-op care, but she never left. She said the air helped her sleep, and the silence made her think clearly. She still wore oversized cardigans and kept her tea kettle running all day. Her eyes, once tired from years in sterile clinics, now held a softness Eli hadn't seen in her before. Together, they had begun talking about building something more permanent. "Not a shelter," Rachel had said, brushing hair from her face as she studied the blueprint sketch on the dining table. "Not a rescue, either. Something in between. A place where animals come after the damage but before the forgetting." Eli nodded. "A refuge." And so the idea was born. Coldwater Refuge, a place for new beginnings. A carved wooden sign, freshly varnished, now stood outside the cabin's porch. Hand-painted letters, each one shaped with intention. The land behind the cabin had been partially cleared. Rachel and Eli had plans for an open yard, a few heated kennels, and a therapy room. Nova had been the first success story. She had gained weight, nothing too dramatic, but her ribs were no longer pronounced and her coat was slowly recovering its sheen. The tightness around her eyes had lessened. She still rarely barked. But she followed Eli with a silent loyalty, waited by the door when he stepped outside, and leaned into Rachel's legs whenever she entered the room. And the pups, Ash, Maple, and Scout, had transformed completely. Ash, the smoky gray runt with big paws and sleepy eyes, had grown stronger. He was the most affectionate, always seeking warmth and cuddles, often found snoozing under Rachel's desk. Maple, the red-brown pup with folded ears and a determined trot, had taken after Nova. She was brave, cautious, and rarely startled. She was the first to pick up on commands, already learning basic recall and sit gestures. Scout, the smallest but most energetic, had light tan fur with dark patches around his eyes like a mischievous bandit. Curious to a fault, he had once knocked over a stack of logs and had an unexplainable fascination with Rachel's shoelaces. They ran free in the snow now, yipping and tumbling over each other just outside the porch. Eli sat on the steps, wrapped in his thick sheriff's coat, a cup of black coffee steaming in his hands. Nova stood nearby, eyes watching her pups. Her ears perked as they tackled each other, one of them yipping in surprise, then returning the favor. Then, for the first time, she lifted her head, muzzle pointed slightly upward, and barked. A deep, clear sound that echoed through the trees. It was sharp, bright, and impossibly full of life. Eli turned slowly. Rachel looked up from the window, eyes wide. Then a smile spread across her lips, not surprised, but proud. "She barked," she whispered. "She barked," Eli echoed. Nova shook out her fur, her breath misting in the cold, then took off down the slope and joined her pups, tail high, running in wide loops that sent snow spraying into the air. She didn't limp. She didn't hold back. She was finally home. Sarah visited later that afternoon. She brought supplies, extra blankets, a backup generator, and a sturdy new harness she said would look badass on Nova. She didn't stay long. She never did. But before leaving, she paused near the new wooden sign and touched the carved letters. "You're building something good here," she said to Eli. "You helped make it possible." Sarah shrugged. "I just showed up with a rifle. She's the one who dragged you out alive." Eli watched Nova lying in the snow beside Ash, the two of them side by side like mirror images, one beginning, one healed. "Sometimes," he said, "you just need someone to remind you what love looks like. Sometimes miracles don't come with thunder or lightning. Sometimes they come on 4 legs, shivering in the snow, wrapped in silence but holding on to hope." Nova didn't speak, didn't cry, didn't beg. She simply waited, and through the hands of a broken sheriff, a weary vet, and a team that refused to give up, God answered. This story isn't just about rescuing dogs. It's about redemption, second chances, and the quiet way God sends us love when we need it most. Sometimes His mercy looks like a wagging tail. Sometimes it looks like courage hidden in scars. So if you've ever felt forgotten, abandoned, like your voice didn't matter, remember Nova, and remember that even in the darkest forest, God's light can still find you. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Comment Amen below. If you believe every life animal or human deserves love and healing, subscribe if you believe that kindness is still alive in this world. And may God bless everyone watching, wherever you are. From our little cabin in Coldwater, thank you for being here. Amen.